Tonight's class is about no apologies. Very important topic, and it's really understanding the root cause of anti-Semitism. We will address a little bit at the very beginning, but I don't want to put a lot of emphasis on it. Many different opinions of what the cause of anti-Semitism is, but ultimately we just want to cover all ground, but to focus obviously on the Torah perspective of anti-Semitism and see about what it's all about, understanding the root of it, and then being able to have a perspective about it. And that perspective will help us deal with it in our own. So we start with anti-Semitism. The first thing we're going to look at is the fact that anti-Semitism is not something that began recently. It's something that has been going on for several thousand years. And obviously, if you see something so long, perhaps one will be concerned that when is this going to end? So we'll also bring some light and some optimism to the topic. I'm going to ask you to read text number 1 and 2. I think if everybody reads it on their own, everybody could bring out something, and I'll give about 2-3 minutes for everybody to share their thoughts about what's underline the phrases that feed into well-known anti-Semitic stereotypes and prejudices. Summarize your findings in the box that follow the text. So read the text and put down things that you feel are the root cause of anti-Semitism today. Okay, so we have the fact that there's a lot of absurdity and there's a lot of contradiction. Okay, so if we go to the ancients, so let's look at some of the issues that were societal problems, which is blamed on the Jews, and this was something that how many people blamed COVID-19 on Israel or the religious community? Right? So societal problems blame the Jews. The Jews are lazy. Okay? That's why we're in charge of the banks and everything, right? Because we're very lazy. That's part of the contradictions, right? We're communists. Right. Right. Exactly. Yes. So we're lazy. Rejected by God. Now this is very important because I don't want to say that I reject you, but if I could say that someone else doesn't like you, right? That's a very convincing argument. And so this is something that people have used over the years. What's the next one? They have to consider the Zoom video. Opposing values, right? Our values are never the same. Let's have a look. What else do we have here? We got another whole list of things. Well, we're lazy, but somehow we're wealthy. Okay. We rip off the non-Jews. We hate non-Jews. In fact, you know what we do? Well, the blood libels, right? We kill non-Jews, right? So all of these things. Now, these things are still happening to some degree today. Okay, and the last one here is we definitely have cruel rituals as a result. Yeah, no, that's the blood libels, the matzahs. Okay, so here's an example where we see that September 11th attacks were blamed on the Jews. Okay. Jews did 9/11, Google dancing Israelis. Okay. So you didn't hear about this?
No, I heard they all called in sick that day because they, yes, that was.
Well, that's why. Well, let's have a look at this text. Okay, conspiracy theories are rarely logical. It is not surprising then that even as Al-Qaeda took credit for the September 11th attacks, the group did nothing to stop a rumor claiming that the Jews were really responsible. The rumor alleged that Israel, specifically Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, was behind the plot and had warned Jews not to go to work at the World Trade Center on the day of the attacks. On September 18th, an editor for a website known as the Information Times posted a message claiming that the terrorist government of Israel cannot be ruled out as a suspect. The editor did not identify a motive or provide evidence in support of his allegation. In his words, he was simply raising a reasonable question. 5 days later, Al-Manar, a TV station based in Lebanon, stated that Mossad had indeed warned 4,000 Jews who worked at the World Trade Center to stay home on September 11th. Within days, the rumor appeared in newspapers and electronic mailing lists around the world. People continued to believe the lie despite the fact that about 18% of the known dead were identified in obituary as Jews. Now, this idea is something that is not new and something that we dealt with. And here is an example that we're going to have. We're going to use the video. I'm going to just close this for a moment. So we're going to watch a video here. The video here is about Reb Menachem Zemba. There's certain names that we talk about, we bring up in class, that I feel a connection to because I met someone that actually knew this rabbi. Reb Menachem Zemba was the rabbi of one of my teachers, Rabbi Greenberg, who was the chief rabbi in come back to me, somewhere in New Jersey, in Patterson. And Rabbi Greenberg met Rabbi Zemba when he was running during the early days of the Holocaust, and had to get advice from him. And Rabbi Zemba gave him advice that was very helpful, and he made his way to America. But I'm not going to get into that story, but this is a little bit about Reb Menachem Zemba's response, leading to what I was saying before about the discrepancy and the contradictions. So let's watch this video.
On the east bank of the Vistula River, in the Warsaw suburb of Praga, a Jewish boy was born in 1883 and named Menachem, he who brings comfort. His father, Elazar Zemba, died shortly after, and the boy was raised by his grandfather. He became rapidly known as a dazzling genius and formidable Torah scholar, corresponding with the best Torah minds of his era. Menachem Zemba married at age 18. His wealthy father-in-law supported him for 20 years while he studied and put pen to paper, authoring over 10,000 pages of original Torah insights, including commentaries on Maimonides' magnum opus and on the Jerusalem Talmud, and 4 volumes of halachic responsa. His fame spread globally. He was offered rabbinical positions, including the office of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but he humbly shunned leadership. Leadership was thrust upon him in 1935 by order of the Grand Rabbi of Ger. The humble rabbi joined the Warsaw Rabbinate and proved his worth, becoming a world authority on Jewish law and a foremost spokesman for Polish Jewry. Before reaching age 40, Rabbi Zemba was appointed honorary secretary to Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah, the Council of Great Torah Sages, populated by sages twice his age. In 1937, he twice addressed the full assemblage and was treated with awe. Then the Nazis arrived. Jewish Warsaw was reduced to a ghetto. 460,000 people were imprisoned in just 1.3 square miles. Starvation, disease, deportation, murder. Despite repeated offers of escape, Rabbi Zemba refused to abandon his flock. To them, he was a rare pillar of comfort. As one of a handful of rabbis who survived in the ghetto until its final days, he rallied his desperate brethren with powerful messages of hope and determination. He recorded an insight into the nature of anti-Semitism before the war. In light of his subsequent experiences under Nazi depravity, his words ring with timeless poignancy. There are those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews. However, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate God's people. This is demonstrated by the fact that Jews are hated for being capitalists and also for being socialists. They are hated because they are overly ambitious and sharp-minded, and also because they are indolent and parasitic. They are hated because they are too religious and conservative, and also because they advance progressive and secular ideas. The reasons for this hatred are consistently contradictory and have not an ounce of logic behind them. Shortly before Passover, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising erupted. Amid furious fighting and flames, Rabbi Zemba calmly conducted a Passover Seder as if nothing was amiss. But on the fifth day of Passover, April 24, 1943, Rabbi Zemba was gunned down by Nazi bullets. The community he shepherded with love and sacrifice came together at terrible risk to bury their beloved rabbi in a temporary grave. His family was deported to Treblinka. None survived. His lifetime of copious writings rose to heaven in the Warsaw fires. Hardly any of it survived. In 1958, his body was exhumed. Tens of thousands of people amassed, including an array of leading Jewish sages, to lay the heroic rabbi to eternal rest in dignity. Reality has proven that this righteous man was right. There is no legitimate reason for the hatred leveled in each generation against the innocent men, women, and children of the Jewish people.
Okay. So bottom line is there's hate. And the hate expresses itself in whatever way it can, in whatever it sees, because it hates. A lot of people take the approach that dealing with it is by educating. Now, the truth is that educating people is important. A lot of people we have someone in our community spends a lot of time going around educating people. It's important. But to the real haters, that education is not the ultimate, is not really a solution. So it's limited. We have here a text number 5. Same author as spoken from last week, Deborah Lipstadt. It is hard, if not impossible, to explain something that is essentially irrational, delusional, and absurd. That is the nature of all conspiracy theories, of which anti-Semitism is just one. Think about it. Why do some people insist that the moon landings took place on a stage set someplace in the American West, despite the existence of reams of scientific and personal evidence to the contrary. They believe this because they subscribe to the notion that the government and other powerful entities are engaged in vast conspiracies to fool the public. If we were to provide these conspiracy theories with evidence that proves the landing was indeed on the moon, they would dismiss what we say and assume we are part of the conspiracy. To try to defeat an irrational supposition, especially when it is firmly held by its proponents with a rational explanation, is virtually impossible. Any information that does not correspond with the conspiracy theorists' preferred social, political, or ethnic narratives is ipso facto false. Social scientists have described such theories as having a self-sealing quality that makes them particularly immune to challenge. Now, before we continue talking about how do we deal with this, the word anti-Semite, where does it come from? Who came up with the name anti-Semite? So many think of it as a word that perhaps Jews came up with to describe those who didn't like them. But it's actually a name that anti-Semites created themselves to be able to create some kind of there's a text here, text number 6. It was created to show that it's where does it say over here? I don't want to read the whole text, but they wanted it to be. He used the words, the last line. He used the words anti-Semitism to make Jew hatred seem rational, sanctioned by science, polite. Okay, so it's absurd. The whole idea is absurd. We go back to see what the Jewish people call it, because understanding what Jewish people called it is actually, Jewish people called it a word that I heard growing up a lot when someone did something that was just simply mean. And what's the word? That anti-Semite, right? No. So what was the word? The word was rishus. And we see this in text number 7. And this is from 1687. It was based on there was something that happened to some Jewish people and in Hamburg, and the non-Jews were sentenced to death by local authorities for murdering the innocent Jewish men. Now you know what happened, but basically the anti-Semites in Hamburg didn't like what happened to the murderers, because the Jews deserved the death, right? And so the article uses the word rishus. And the word rishus comes from Russia, which means evil, evildoer. A rishus means simply evil and wickedness. And so it's important to recognize that what anti-Semitism is simply wickedness. Let's go through all the, okay. The question is, why the Jews?
I know.
Right. That's what we said last week, right? So I opened before and I said there are many different, before we go into the Torah perspective of why anti-Semitism, there are many different reasons. And in text number 8, these explanations are given by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, explaining anti-Semitism. We could probably spend 4 hours discussing these reasons. We're just citing them so that we address all possible reasons for anti-Semitism, and then we'll go into something a little deeper that gives us perspective. There have been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism actually is. Some have seen it in psychological terms: displaced fear, externalization of inner conflict, projected guilt, the creation of a scapegoat. So it's psychological. Others have given it a social-political explanation. Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for economic resentments, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilizing change. We need to blame someone for all the problems. They look like they're a good group to blame. Yet others view it through the prism of culture and identity. Jews were the stereotype, outsiders against whom a group could define itself. So, you're very different. And so we'll blame those who are different, because if everybody was like me, the world will be a much better place. Yet others, noting the concentration of anti-Semitism among the very faiths, Christianity and Islam, that trace their descendant to Abraham and Judaism, favor a Freudian explanation in terms of the myth of Oedipus, who we seek to kill those who gave us birth. There is a concept, anybody familiar with this? Of what the myth of Oedipus, where basically people want to kill the father to get the mother, but they can't do it, so they kill someone else.
Yeah, I think it worked out that Oedipus didn't know he was marrying his mother, right?
Right, he didn't know.
But the idea is that a lot of times you hate one person, and because you can't really do something, so you got to let out your frustration and anger on someone else. So who do you do it, right? You feel something's blocking. So it's like, if I want to get rid of the father, then I could have a different kind of relationship. I can have a different kind of life. And if our religion comes from Judaism, get rid of the Jew, and then we're number one, right? We're the ones in the spotlight. It would be strange indeed if so complex a phenomenon did not give rise to multiple explanations. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're not going to discuss any of these four. We're going to go back into the story of Esther, and that is how we are going to, what we're going to do for the next half hour or so, and try to understand anti-Semitism, and based on the story of Esther, the root of anti-Semitism, from the way the Rebbe sees it, based on Medrash and the story of Esther and Achashverosh. Let's see what happens, and that will also give us a perspective of how to respond to it. Again, if there's an immediate danger that one finds themselves in, then the response obviously has to be different. If someone's calling names or bothering me, sometimes I have to put locks on my doors, right? Sometimes I have to fight for myself. This is not negating those things that we have to do, whether we have to put up security cameras or whatever it is. But how do I live every day? Am I living in fear? Am I able to see a different perspective and be able to deal with it and understand it, so that I could actually make a difference in this world? Because as long as we're dealing with fear, and one of the things that we're going to talk about is if we're fearful, some of the responses that we have are, after the shooting in the Pittsburgh synagogue and the shooting in the Chabad of California, what was the Howie? Thank you. So people called me in the community and said, Rabbi, we're very concerned about you. Why are you concerned about me? Because you walk in the street like an obvious Jew. Which means that when people are afraid, suddenly their response is, you know what, let me cover up. That's one response. Another response is, let me not mention when I go out to work or go out with my friends that I'm Jewish, because I don't want to spike any anti-Semitism and make the issues worse. There are issues with that, and that's what we're going to do. One of the things that we're going to discuss, and we're going to talk about how living Jewish has tremendous, tremendous benefits and might actually be a better answer. So let's have a look, start with the story of Esther. So Esther is now the queen of Persia. It's not just Persia, but Achashverosh now is the king over the ruler over 120 provinces. It's the majority of the world is under his rulership at the time. And this Jewish girl is the queen. Haman comes to Achashverosh and he wants to destroy the Jews. He tells him there's a certain people. Now, if we remember, Esther hid her identity. So Achashverosh doesn't know that this is a Jewish girl. Haman is now upset with Mordechai. He hates him. I'm not going to go into why he hates him. We're going to find that out, actually. But why, from the simple story, we're going to go into a deeper perspective. But Mordechai annoys him every time he walks down the street. He wants to get rid of him. And he tells the king that they're scattered and separate among the people throughout all the provinces of your kingdom. And he wants permission to destroy them. He tells Achashverosh that I'm going to give you 10,000 silver coins. Just get rid of all these Jews. And Achashverosh says, you've convinced me. No need to pay me anything. Do what you wish. Get rid of them. And he draws a lot, which is why it's called Purim, right? Because Purim means lot in ancient Persian. And he says, do as you please. You don't have to pay me. So the Medrash, brought down in the Talmud, tells us as follows. He brings a parable, text number 9. We could use a parable to gain insight. We're on page 61. Into the respective positions of Achashverosh and Haman. They are similar to two individuals, one of whom has a tool mound in his field, whereas the other has a ditch in his field. The owner of the ditch mused it to himself, I wish I could buy the tool mound to fill up my ditch. The owner of the mound says to himself, I wish I could purchase the right to dump my mound into his empty ditch. Not long afterward, the two met. The owner of the ditch said, sell me your mound. The owner of the mound said, take it for free. You'll be doing me a favor. It reminds me that when we had to dig, we had to excavate. So yeah, we were looking for someone to take the soil because it's more expensive to take it away. So if someone needs it, but no one needed it, so we had to pay to ship it away, and it was more expensive than excavating. It was crazy. But anyway, Achashverosh says it's okay. So he doesn't need any convincing. The silver you can keep, and the people do with them as you please. That's what Achashverosh says. The Rebbe asks two questions. He asks, number one, what deeper insight is gained from this parable? Every parable that's given in the Medrash or in the Talmud is there because there's a missing link. There's something missing. You see, if I'm teaching a group of young children, I may tell story after story after story. I don't really need to tell them all that many, but at the end of the class, hopefully the message will be received and internalized. If I only had two of the smartest kids in the class, and there I could have just told them one example and moved on. What was it about the story that we couldn't understand without this parable? Haman comes along to Achashverosh. He says, I don't like the Jews. I'll pay you. And Achashverosh says, well, you don't like them? Tell me why you don't like them. He tells him why you don't like them. He says, well, if you don't like them, get rid of them. You don't need to pay me. What is there to not understand in the story that I have to start giving you a parable of a person who has a ditch and another person who has a mound, and the one with the mound wants to get rid of it and put it in the guy's ditch, and the one with the ditch wants to get the guy's mound and put it in the... How do we understand this? So the Rebbe explains as follows. What was going on? So he says, Achashverosh, there are two kinds of anti-Semitism. The pile and the ditch. This is how we understand it. Achashverosh is the typical Jew hater. The uneducated guy who hears some negative things about the Jew. The kid in the class that someone came over to him and told him some lashon hara, some negative talk about another kid. And now he says, oh, I don't like that kid because I heard this negative. Typical racist. He has a mound in his field, and he just wants to simply get rid of this mound. Where does Haman come along? Haman is a different kind of guy. Haman has an emptiness within him. He's feeling a void in his life, hence a ditch. There's a ditch in his life. There's something that he's feeling a void. What happens to the student in the class who feels inadequate? He either climbs on a chair to raise himself above others, or he takes another kid and he pushes him to the ground. Because typically, when a kid pushes, or another human being, an adult, says something negative to someone else, it's usually because they have a sense of a low self-esteem, a void, something that they're missing. And when they see someone who doesn't have that void, who is happy with their lot, who has whatever they're missing, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. So, who's the worst anti-Semite? Who's the real anti-Semite? So Achashverosh is the guy that you can go around and you can educate. You could help him. You could tell him, by the way, whatever you heard about those guys, it's not really true. You know, they always say about the difference between the Jew and the anti-Semite. What's the difference between the Jew and the anti-Semite? The Jew, he says, I should say the anti-Semite says, I hate all Jews. They're all horrible. They're all terrible people. They're all wealthy and lazy and all the bad things I could say about them. But Moshe, my neighbor, he's a wonderful guy. He's the exception. He's a really nice guy. He always helps me. He always says good morning. He's a wonderful guy. The Jewish guy says, what are you talking about? The Jewish people are wonderful people. Every Jew is amazing. They're all charitable and everything else. But Moshe, my neighbor, he's a miserable piece of you know what. Okay, so just different perspective. Because we love Jews, we just can't stand our neighbor. Okay. So we have two different kinds of anti-Semites here. We have the Achashverosh anti-Semite, who just sees Jews as a mound, and we can just easily get rid of them. Educate him. And all the ways that people are out there trying to influence these people, it's a very good idea. But Haman, on the other hand, he's feeling a tremendous emptiness. text number 10 from the book of Esther. Haman told him about his magnificent wealth and his many sons, and how the king had promoted him. He's telling this to his family, and how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the other officials in royal quarters. What is more, said Haman, Queen Esther personally prepared a feast, and besides the king, she did not invite anyone but me. And tomorrow too, I am invited by her, along with the king. But all this means nothing to me each time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the palace gate. I could get everything. I could have everything in the world. You can give me everything you want, but if I'm feeling an emptiness, I'm lacking something that I see someone else has, I can't get over it. In other words, the best word to define this issue would be jealousy. Simple jealousy. There are people that you can't tell them about your successes because they feel so empty that they get jealous. Sometimes you tell a wonderful story to someone and then afterwards you see they walk away sad, upset. And you realize that there are people have emptiness in their life and people are upset. They're not upset at you, they're upset, they express it to you. They're upset because you have, one of the things I always emphasize, because I always have great stories. Every day I have great stories. But I always say that it's just a matter of opening up your eyes and recognizing. Because I want people to realize it's not just stories that happen to me. They can happen to everyone. But it's a natural response when you see someone who has something. And I'm not talking about physical wealth. When you see someone who has meaning, purpose, and joy, just pure joy, and you yourself don't have it, it becomes very, very difficult. And that is the emptiness that Haman has. But all this means nothing to me each time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the palace gate. I feel empty. What he's saying is I feel empty each time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the palace gate. The real issue is here that what Haman was really missing was the recognition that every single human being has purpose. Every human being has value. If Haman was able to recognize somehow that he had value, his own life had value, and that he was a partner in creation, just like we are, he wouldn't have had such negative feelings. So what was really bothering him is that I feel empty. And Mordecai is not empty. Mordecai has faith. Mordecai has joy. Mordecai is optimistic every day of his life. In fact, even when I tell him that he's going to die tomorrow, he's still gathering up the Jewish kids and going out there. And yes, he put on sackcloth and he cried and he fasted and everything else. But he didn't lose his pride in being a Jew. It's very important. So what happens
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
Small one. So isn't what you just described, isn't the difference between good and evil, not just anti-Semitic and Jewish?
What we're saying is that the root cause of anti-Semitism, according to this story, seems to be evil, which we called it rishut, right? Before, right? It's simple evil that comes from a lack of void, from a void, from a lack of meaning.
So we as a pride Jew, we have to treat those anti-Semitic as evil people, or just because it's a problem.
So there's two questions. There's questions
As
of
if we want to influence them.
how do we respond to them? How do we treat them? Depends what they're doing, right? Depends what they're doing. Depends what they're if they're about to kill us, we have to fight back, right? It's so the question is how we view ourselves, and this is where I'm getting to. You see, the problem is, and that's what we're going to go to in text number 11. The problem is that when a child is bullied, or an adult is bullied, or anybody has gone through abuse, what's the natural reaction? There's a problem with me and I need to change. I'm doing something, and a lot of times parents or people will say to a child, like, I have no friends. What are you doing that's causing you to not be liked? You know, maybe you should have introspection. That's what you need. Figure out what you're doing wrong so that you could avoid that situation. So the child tries to change, tries to be nice and kind. Doesn't help. They try to change themselves. The problem is that the reason why the bully's doing what they're doing is because they're the problem, not you. Right? The victim is not the problem. The bully is the problem. The victim does not need to change. Us changing, and that's why I brought up, people telling me, we're afraid of you. Maybe I shouldn't look so religious when I'm walking down the street when everybody else is afraid about anti-Semitism, because, God forbid, who knows who's going to be next. But that's not going to change. We know how many people in our history changed. How many times did Jewish people stop behaving outwardly Jewish, even inwardly Jewish? Go to the Spanish Inquisition. How many Jews actually converted? Did not keep Jewish practices in private, and were still hated. And that's text number 11. So avoiding being Jewish openly is not the answer. It doesn't help, because that void is still there, that hatred is still there, and that's not going to help anyone. So how do we deal with it? So some people, again, some people say, well, we got to assimilate. Some people renounce the traditions. Let me take off my kippah. And others renounce their belief, because if I sort of become like everyone else, and I'm not going to be seen as a as the one that stands out, then maybe they won't pick on me as much. So if I come tomorrow because I was wearing a different kind of clothing, and tomorrow I come in dressed differently, maybe they'll treat me differently. And that's not the case. And everybody knows this, not just from global anti-Semitism, from everybody has their own stories of things. Sari shared something last week about in school, and we could hide, but that anti-Semitism doesn't go away. So how do we respond? Now, whether or not we're going to be able to get rid of anti-Semitism completely anti-Semitism has always been here, 2,000 years. No one can claim to have the solution. The solution is ultimately Mashiach. Because at that time, and what we're doing in this world, by being a light upon the nations, is what we're doing is telling the world that they all have purpose and meaning. When the world can recognize that they have purpose and meaning, and we could fill that void, then what happens is there's no more hatred. That's only going to happen when Mashiach comes, and that's why it says at that time, V'gar Ze'ev and Keves and so on. So instead of looking inward and seeing myself as the problem, I have to turn outward and see how can I do more to change things.
Why did you say anti-Semitism is 2,000 years old?
More. Yeah.
3,000 years old.
3,000. Yeah. 100%. Not only 2,000, 3,000 years old. Yeah, I always think in context of the destruction of the temple, but way before, 100%. And the truth is, it started from Esav, which Esav was the brother of Jacob, and there was hatred from day one. He sold the blessings, but what happened afterwards? He had a void in his life, and he couldn't get over that. So hate exists, and something that's very important to recognize, that the cause of hatred is not what I'm doing. Today it might be because I went out without a mask. Tomorrow it's going to be because I came in with a mask, right? Every day it's going to be whatever I could see about the Jew. That's going to be the problem if you hate the Jew. It's just the reality. So we have to have an open identity, and the reason why it's so important to have an open identity is because of the following. I want to read the text number 12. It's a good text. I was once traveling on a bus. This is by Rabbi Abraham Tversky, also a blessed memory. Incredible speaker and writer. I was once traveling on a bus dressed in my customary garb, wearing a broad black hat and a black frock coat. A man approached me and said, "I think it's shameful that your appearance is so different. There is no need for Jews in America to be so conspicuous with long beards and black hats." "I'm sorry, mister," I said to the man. "I'm not Jewish, I'm Amish, and this is how we dress." The man became apologetic. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir," he said. "I did not mean to offend you. I think you should be proud of preserving your traditions." Now, I've been asked if I was Amish many times, especially now the brim style of the hat changes every so often. So when I was younger, it was a much smaller brim. Today, it's gone back to the narrower brims. But there were years when the wider brim was sort of in the style, and those are the years where I got all the Amish comments. "Oh, are you Amish? I love the Amish," and things like that. But so the question is, there are a couple of points that we need to make here. We're going to make 3 points of why it's important to be open about our Judaism and our faith. Again, not that necessarily this is going to be the answer and get rid of anti-Semitism, but we will see how this is something that's very important, that we should be openly Jewish. Do we belong in America? I think so. Do we have the right to live in America? Yes. The Rebbe sort of brings out the point that when it came to the debate of whether or not menorahs should be displayed publicly, the Rebbe spoke. This is 1991. It was actually a big part of it was this debate was about putting up a menorah in Teaneck. So we had discussions. Now, of course, who was against it? It was many Jewish people, some that I know. But the Rebbe's point was that until we could display our Judaism publicly, we haven't truly been accepted. If I cannot open up a synagogue in Old Japan, I'm not accepted in Old Japan. And it's not just about Jews. And that's going to be the next point. The first thing is about ourselves. If we want to think of ourselves as accepted, we can't be accepted only when we look like others. So if we're truly accepted, and if we belong in the United States, We should be able to walk around with a kippah, with a beard, and be respected. You know, people make such a big deal about race. It's really interesting. That, and I think perhaps a little bit from the Rebbe's teachings of the value of every human being. To me, I meet Korean, I meet an Indian, I meet a Russian. They're all the same. They're all creations of God who are here for a mission and a purpose. Because this one bows like this and looks different, because this one decides to dress a little bit differently, it doesn't bother me. The kid wants to go to the high school wearing a burqa, with pleasure. Why would it bother me? If we are to accept, and if diversity is really a thing, then we should really truly be diverse and be able to accept everyone. And we as Jews should not feel that the only way we could be accepted is if we look like everyone else, because then we're not really being accepted. So that's one important thing, and that's about ourselves. We need to confirm that we belong here. Being able to display our Judaism publicly, not necessarily in someone's face, right? If I start, every so often, I'll get in the mail from a church or from another religion, it says here in Rachel. Yeah, it says Rachel, okay. Rachel. So every so often we'll get something of someone sending me why their Messiah is the true one, and I should really, you get these missionaries or whatever they are. If I'm not pushing Judaism on my neighbor, I should be able to display a 9-foot menorah on my lawn, and no one should bother me. The same way, the church has every right to put up the cross as big as they want, and it shouldn't bother me. So a lot of times people are uncomfortable because they think that the moment I have the menorah up and I have this up, now people are going to look at the Jews as different, and now we're going to cause problems. But here's another important reason that I think, we're not only concerned about ourselves, right? We have to think about others. If we send a message that we cannot display our Judaism, then what we're really doing is hurting not only ourselves, but every minority. If we can show that we can display our Judaism with pride, then other minorities can also feel accepted. If the Jew could walk down the street proud of his religion, then I could be a proud carrier of my religion, of my background, of where I come from. I think it's very important. And finally, we have a role. And our role is to influence. So let's think about what happens to Achashverosh. So we understand the root cause of anti-Semitism, it seems, based on the story of Haman coming to Achashverosh, is that he had that void, he had that ditch, that he was lacking something, and because he didn't feel good about himself, he becomes the bully to those who are happy and feel that they have purpose in life. What's the response? The response is not to say, oh, I'll just be like Haman, because that doesn't help. That kind of anti-Semite hates you regardless. The only thing that you could do is continue to display your pride, because it benefits you and it benefits everybody else around. And part of our mission. But let's think about something else. Let's go now to Achashverosh. So we said Achashverosh was the simple Jew hater. He just, like everybody else, he heard bad things, so he followed. And now this Jew was the mound in his property. What happened to Achashverosh? What changed when Achashverosh heard Esther was a Jew? What happened? You see, it's very interesting. They're sitting at, for those who are not completely familiar with the story, they're sitting at a meal, Esther and Haman and Achashverosh. Esther invites Haman, we said this before, to the meal together for dinner with the king. And Esther says to the king that there is a man who wants to destroy my people. And for the first time, Achashverosh says, 1 second, who are your people? And she says, I'm a Jew. And Achashverosh gets angry. He says, what? You want to kill my wife and all, my queen and all her people? If he was such a Jew hater, what happened there? Why would he not just save his wife? He loves his queen. He still hates everybody else just as Haman does. Obviously, there's a difference in the hate. Haman's hate was that void. The void, unless you fill the void, it's still a hate. Achashverosh needed one simple thing, and I think this is the response, the importance of our response. Living as proud Jews, we may not directly affect those who really hate us and who are really out to get us because they're feeling that void. That takes for Mashiach to come. We might impact them a little bit along the way, but who we're really impacting is not only ourselves and the minority, but we're also sending a message to those anti-Semites who are like Achashverosh. They only hate us simply because they've heard negative about us. There's no rationale to their hatred. What happened? Achashverosh sees that Esther is a wonderful, wonderful person. She is not only charming, she's not only physically beautiful, but she has a character. She has a behavior, a modesty. She has so much about her that Achashverosh recognizes that this comes from somewhere. And the moment she says, my people, he says, 1 second, where do you come from? These are the people that I have to like because I love you. Because whatever you have, I imagine everybody else lives the same way. You know, it's the first time you meet someone from a certain country and they're wonderful people. What do you think immediately? All the people in that country are wonderful people, right? It's right. So, unless you know already things about the people in that country, go ahead.
I have to tell you, when I was in high school, you know, when we were reading or even before, I would say, what is going on here? Esther says, you should realize the nation from which I come. It is my people, produced me, educated me. I conduct myself in his ways. She's one of how many wives he has? And this was the one we're holding up as our idol? That just didn't sit well with me. Would we? Well, I guess David had a lot of wives too, right? And Solomon? But that was a long, 500 years before Esther.
But Esther was something unique. That stood out.
I'm just saying it really used to hit me
Yeah.
in the 50s, starting with the 60s, to see that this was what our best queen was. It upset me. I'm just saying.
So it was Hashem was obviously putting her there in that position to be able for Achashverosh to recognize the value of a Jew. And so what does this tell me? This was like the aha moment. The moment she says where she comes from, they always say in JLI, every class has the aha moment. Every course has like that moment that goes, wow, I didn't think of this before. This is Achashverosh's aha moment. Suddenly he says, wow, I never realized this is where you come from. There's no way I'm going to kill such a people. In other words, when we display how many people do I meet that aren't religious, that have a respect, that aren't Jewish, that have a respect for religious people, and especially Jewish religious people? Why? Because they say you live with values. There's a certain respect that people have and an awe. And if only I actually lived up to the level that they think I am, right? But the truth is, we are by showing the value of Judaism and living up to who we are, for many of those anti-Semites, not the ones who are feeling that void, but are only doing it because they hear what other people say, it's not only educating them, because that also helps, but it's actually living up to that. They should meet a Jew and they say, wow, I actually never realized. Finally, I met a Jew and I see this is a person who has values. This is a person who's a citizen who's upright and just a wonderful person, a good person, a kind person. When we live as a proud Jew, we're making that impact, and that's the continuing our historic role, because that is our role. Our role. So may my life be given, Esther says. May my life be given me in my petition and my people in my request. She's talking about my people is responsible for my superior quality. I'm not a quality. My qualities don't come because, they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. If I have qualities, those qualities, I always tell people when, often people call me up, someone passed away in the family. I know the family well, but I never met the person, the parents or the grandparents. And I often say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, because the qualities I see from the children, it comes from somewhere. And that's what Achashverosh recognized. And that's the role that we have. To be that proud Jew, to being that good person reduces anti-Semitism. Yeah. Okay. Being a good person, openly Jewish, and linking goodness to our identity. So not just being a good person because I'm another American, and that's why I'm kind. If I'm openly Jewish, and then my Jewishness could be a reflection of my goodness, could be a reflection of my Judaism, that's a very powerful statement to all those who the Achashverosh kind of anti-Semites. The bottom line is, and I want to finish off with this, and a little story, is that even when we talk about the Haman, go back to Haman, the Haman kind of anti-Semite, which is much difficult to conquer, we have to recognize that if this world was created by God, and everything about God is positive and good, then there must be some good, even in anti-Semitism. Not in the anti-Semitic response or behavior, but in what's causing their anti-Semitism. Someone once went to the Rebbe to discuss whether or not the atom bomb was good or bad. And the Rebbe gave a simple analogy. The Rebbe says, well, tell me, is a knife good or bad? Simple. Depends how you use it. God gave every single human being, deep down, a ditch, a feeling of that I have to accomplish something, that I want to feel needed. I want to live a life of fulfillment. This is something that God gave every single human being, which means that deep down in the anti-Semite, that feeling is coming because he has some good, except that he hasn't learned how to express that good and how to fill that void. And therefore, how does it express itself? Unfortunately, it expresses itself in something positive. But yet, it's a corruption of something positive. It's corruption, but the cause comes from something positive. And therefore, if it's positive, then it must be redeemable. That's not going to happen until Mashiach comes. And that's what I said before. That's what we have in text number 17. The wolf will dwell with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the young goats. These words are a metaphor and a parable. The interpretation of the prophecy is that the Jews will dwell at peace together with the wicked Gentiles, who, like a wolf and leopard, had sought to devour them. There will be peace. Now, again, we may not get there today. But that should not be, first of all, we should recognize that it's not necessarily coming deep down from a negative place. It's expressed in evil. It doesn't exist on its own. And if it doesn't exist on its own, it's not something real, and it's something that eventually we'll get rid of. It's a corruption of something positive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, evil and good. You know what? I saw it before and I was wondering what it was, and I just got it now. Evil and good. Okay. There will come a time when there will be peace, and that represents the nations of the world who have tried to devour us. And when they recognize their purpose and recognize goodness in the world, their own goodness, their innate goodness that they have, there won't be any anti-Semitism. Until then, we have to deal with it. But again, shying away and hiding our identity and getting rid of that pride and going undercover is definitely not the answer, not for us and not for others. And I think this is a very, very powerful message, today's class, something that resonates very well with me, and hopefully could inspire us to do our part, to inspire others towards their divine purpose. And I want to just finish off with the story, and that will be the end of tonight's class. The story is that when the Alter Rebbe of Shnei Zalman of Liadi, we're going to celebrate the Rosh Hashanah for Hasidus in about a week and a half, which is the day the Alter Rebbe of Shnei Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, was jailed. I'm not going to get into the whole story. But when he was in jail, this is almost 300 years ago, when he was in jail, he was visited by the Tsar, and he heard about the Alter Rebbe, and he wanted to see for himself who he is, and he came. Alter Rebbe came in camouflaged. He hid his identity, and Alter Rebbe gave him tremendous respect. And he said to the Alter Rebbe, I want to ask you a question. After the Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, God says to them, they hid. And God says, Ayeka, where are you? And the Alter Rebbe says that he started to tell him Rashi's interpretation, and the minister says, the minister, not the Tsar, he was a minister, who said that, I think the Tsar also visited him, but anyway, the minister says that, I know the Rashi's interpretation, I'd like to hear what your interpretation is. And the Alter Rebbe says to him that God is asking not only Adam and Eve where they are, but in asking Adam and Eve, and in the Torah is a book of lessons for us, God is asking each and every one of us, where are you? And God, he looks at the minister and he says to the minister, God is asking you, where are you? You're this and this amount of years in the world. And the Alter Rebbe says the age, which the minister was completely shocked that he knew his age. And he said, God wants to know, you're this and this amount of years in the world. What have you accomplished in your lifetime? Where are you? Where are you holding? That's the lesson. And ultimately, the Alter Rebbe was so impressed by the Alter Rebbe's approach that he helped bring about the freedom of the Alter Rebbe, the liberation of the Alter Rebbe from jail. Why? Because the Alter Rebbe didn't just focus on himself. What did the Alter Rebbe do? He taught him that he also has purpose. He also has mission. And so our job is not only to focus on me as a Jew and how I should live my life, but when anti-Semitism rears its ugly head, what's my response? My response is important not only to me. Me walking down the street, someone could tell me, stay home for a few weeks now because they're afraid. But me going into hiding is not only going to affect me in a negative way and bring fear upon me and my family, it's actually going to affect negatively my neighbors and others. Because me walking down the street, not because of anything great that I've done, but just the sight of people seeing that I'm proud of who I am. And I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about all of us. When we can walk proud, whether it's a Magen David, a kippah on our head, or putting a menorah in our window, it's not just for us, it's to teach others that they also could do the same, and they also have purpose and meaning. And that is the greatest response that we can have to anti-Semitism. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening for another wonderful class. Next week, we're going to get into the whole discussion about how anti-Semitism manifests itself towards Israel. And I know that's something that we're all very interested in. And so we'll tackle that next week. I look forward to seeing everybody, whether it's virtual. I say a virtual good night to each of you. And thank everybody, each of you, for joining us. If anybody did not get their book, so please be in touch and we will make sure you get it. And again, thank you so much for joining. I hope this was insightful, empowering. We should walk away empowered and realize that we have purpose and meaning and that we can make a difference and not to live, hopefully, in less fear.